see you in the land of Mordor. Death awaits you at the border. Pass on through the gates of fun. Destroy the ring of power and wonder.
Hi, Roman Daisel here with another video about the Middle-earth role-playing game courtesy of Iron Crown Enterprises. Those who aren't familiar, this is the 1980s version of Middle-earth role-playing games, kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons, but much better, I always thought. And this is the third campaign module that they came out with. It's called the Court of Ardor in Southern Middle-earth. This was definitely something different, uncharted territory, because this is not canon. Tolkien never mentioned this at all in any of his works, so this is something that's totally created by the writers. Now this is 2500 in the series, and it's the third campaign module, and it was released in 1983, and it comes with the Southern Middle-earth map by Peter Fenlon. He was one of the editors and writers with Iron Crown at the time for the Middle-earth series, and it's a very unique campaign module. This is where the elephants come from, the Mumakil come from, supposedly. Now, it came from the campaign book, and it had a really cool map of Southern Middle-earth. For context, you can see over here where you got Gondor, Rohan, and Mordor. You follow Harondor, Umbar, the Herodwith, and you keep going all the way down south, and you're in the far reaches of Southern Middle-earth. And that's where this campaign is set in. The Court of Ardor is very interesting. It was something different in that the timeline, it has very little to do with Sauron and the Lord of the Rings itself. It's mostly based on a first age group of renegade Noldor elves with a couple of demonic figures. And the Court of Ardor is a group of Noldor elves that were corrupted in the first age by Morgoth, who was the primordial evil in Middle-earth. When the sun and the moon rose in the sky, so for a way to combat it, because none of his servants could get close enough to the sun to bring it down, and he did try to he did attack the moon, but without success. So what he did was, he came upon some Noldor who didn't like the sun and the moon because they loved the stars better, and he was able to corrupt them, and they were to form a council, or a court, in order to destroy the sun and the moon. That's its only purpose. And it was led by Ardena, the astrologer. She was basically the leader of this court. And also kind of like a tarot card reading, that they have the lords of water, lords of air, lords of earth, and lords of fire. Lords of water were called helms, lords of air were called swords, lords of earth were the orb, and the lords of fire were the suit of staves. So it kind of reads like a card game almost. So they do give you the history of Ardor and its purpose, and then it gives you a timeline. And it says in the year 60 of the sun and the moon, Morgoth charges Ardena with the destruction of the sun and the moon. Now there's also what's called, the good guys are called the Guild of Elements by 5 elven lords in the south, and it details them. So they're kind of like the two factions that play along. And then of course it goes into the flora and fauna of the region. The coast, rainforest, plains, hills, and swamps. Gives you a big chart of what goes on. And then it goes into the people. So there are elves in the south, Sylvan elves. So Ardena and her court would be the Noldoran, the very few Noldoran elves that are there. And it gives you the different groups of people. Of men, the Karani, the Hathorians, the J.R.R, and then there's also dwarves. Now they do mention some of the countries, especially on the map here, of Tuctan, Mumakin, and J.R.R and Coronand are actually, some of them are old Númenórean colonies, and it plays with that, of Númenórean expansionism in the southern Middle-earth. And they give this really cool map of that region. I have the countries already labeled out in black because I was smart enough to put this in the laminate it so it preserves it. And on the other side you have the cities. So I give you some pretty cool cityscapes in a ruined one, and it's got the Court of Ardor in there, the suit of swords, orbs up there, staves, and helms are the 4 main elements of Ardor. So it goes through all the little countries of Ardor in the region. And then it has the Lords of Darkness, so the Lady Ardana is obviously one. And there's quite a few of them. There's even a few, the Lord Demon, Morfuin, and Lesh-Y. So it is different than the normal. It's outside the normal Tolkien universe. They try and keep it as much within Tolkien's spirit of things, but he probably would never have approved of it. This sounds too much like D&D in a lot of ways. And there are quite a few characters. It gives you the lesser lords, and then it talks about the Arden deck. Like I said, this is like a tarot card deck. Take on and take down the Court of Ardor is the sole purpose of this campaign module. Or do damage or do service with it, depending on what you want to do. And then it has the other groups in the area, like the Guild of Elements. And it has them. So once it describes all the Guild of Elements and the Court of Ardor, it then goes into the economy of Mumakin. It does briefly have the Sauronic influence in Mumakin. Sauron can never influence the Court of Ardor. They felt no compulsion because they knew him as a lieutenant of Morgoth, but didn't see him as a successor to Morgoth. And then he talks about the 4 cities in Mumakin and places of note. So the Court of Ardor is obviously one of the bigger ones. And it gives you the layout for all these things. All these different places that you can go to. The way they designed the layouts is pretty cool, I thought. And it gives you a garrison. This is probably the coolest one I thought. Mirisgroth, the Mine of Jewels. It's in the middle of the bay. And it's a huge mining complex. Orcs are on the outer ring, and then men and dwarves are on the inner ring. And it's controlled by the Court of Ardor. I thought that was pretty cool. Then it gives you the Guild of Elements, one of their temples. And at the very end, it gives you a master military table and also a poison. And then you can do Ardor in other times, of the other periods of the Third Age. They give some suggestions. But really, the Court of Ardor in the Fourth Age, doesn't really survive the Fourth Age. Nothing ever does that's evil, really. But all in all, it's a very interesting book. I like the fact that the Iron Crown tried to go places where Tolkien never had a chance to go in his mythology. And they kind of fill in the gaps, because Tolkien never really goes that far east or that far south. He briefly mentions Umbar and talks a little bit about its history and touches upon the people of the Haradwaith, but never really delves anywhere further. The same with the east. He never really goes that far east past Rhûn. He talks about migrations, like the Wainriders coming from the east, but he never talks about what countries are to the east and where do the dwarves go and where do the elves go. He talks about where they came from, the lake that the elves awoke from, but he doesn't talk about what they do. They all head west, or some of them must have headed south, east, and north. And the dwarves, they scattered across the area too. So this was Iron Crown's first attempt at going outside the box, and it was pretty good. I thought it was really good. So the Court of Ardor was, when it was released in 1983, by 1988, when I started collecting this stuff and getting into this game, it was no longer available. They had discontinued it, and I could never find it. I actually had to find this off eBay, and it cost me, I think I paid $70 for this, with another $30 in shipping. I paid almost $100 for this book. My mother was pissed off at me at the time, because I was in South Korea, and I could only ship it home to Canada, and she handled the transaction for me. This was before there was PayPal. So she wasn't too pleased with me buying this, but it was part of the collection and one of the things I needed. Anyway, that's all I have for the Court of Ardor in Southern Middle-earth. Anyone who's ever played Middle-earth role-playing game, did they ever have this module? I would love to know. I never had a chance to play this with a group, and it would have been really cool to have tried. I do screw around on my own solitaire with armies, try and take over as much of it as I can, but it's just not the same as actually playing role-playing. Anyway, until next time, this is Roman Daisel. I'm out of here.